In your organizations, things tend to be siloed. Usually one group will be working on a project that the other group may not be involved with, so a lot of times there's a disconnect in terms of communication. So this panel is going to talk about how to connect the dots, how to see what other parts of the organization are working on, some of the successes that you may have experienced, and what the best practices are in terms of looking at that in your organization. So I'd like to introduce Ronnie Tham, who is the Director of Sustainability Global Sourcing with Walmart. Ronnie is based in China, so he brings some different perspectives than many of us have being based here in the US. And also, Ronnie focuses a lot on sustainability and how to have a positive impact in the community, people, and the world. So Ronnie, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? All right. Hi, morning everyone. Michael, thank you so much for the introduction and also the invitation to lead this panel discussion. We have very distinguished speakers here today. We have Denise from Accenture, Denise from Marriott, Nedra from Accenture, and then Andy from P&G. So this is a very interesting topic and one that is, touches very close to me. Us in Walmart, and I suppose some of you attended our event yesterday. We care very much about supplier diversity, and we do have programs in terms of how do we support our women-owned businesses. And I myself, I'm based in Shenzhen, China. And I lead our global sourcing organization for our sustainability and women economic empowerment initiatives. I work very closely with our suppliers, and in particular to us, supporting sourcing from women-owned businesses is something that we do and is part of, I would say, our culture, right? So when we evaluate a supplier, a new supplier, it could be through going to a trade fair. We go to Canton Fair and we try to meet new suppliers. To us, some of the questions that we ask, other than what sort of products you have, is are you a women-owned business, right? So it is part of the way we do business, and we track it, we measure it, and we run trainings as well. And in partnership, with WEConnect in China, we've done a number of trainings with them. And in China, there is also a grouping with folks from Marriott, Accenture. I don't think P&G is a member in that. Maybe we should include you guys. So definitely there's a lot of interest in China, right? And our topic today here on how do we include supplier diversity and inclusion, being part of strategy in terms of a company's CSR and sustainability. And there's one commonality that we have, we spoke briefly earlier, is that most of us here, on top of supplier diversity, we also lead other functions. And Denise leads sustainability as well in Marriott, and I'm sure the two of you as well. So I think we want to talk today and spend a bit of time in terms of learning about the best practices in your company in terms of how do you incorporate supplier diversity into part of a bigger, more important strategy. All right. So maybe can I start off with Denise in terms of where does supplier diversity and inclusion report up in your organization?
Great, thank you, and thank you very much for having us. So supplier diversity used to actually be part of the procurement function, and in our world, it was procurement was part of global operations, as was sustainability. It was a strategic move about 4+ years ago in our company to actually move the supplier diversity function out of procurement and put it in with the sustainability group. And the primary focus was because it really was not a procurement activity per se in our world, but it was really about making the connections to the decision makers around our company, namely in the operations space, but also in all the other divisions within the company. And so the function was really of doing that. The purpose of pulling it out was really to try to take it away from it's about writing contracts, but about really liaising and relationship building between the suppliers and the decision makers around the business, and having that continue to be embedded within global operations, which is such a key department within our company, was really still important. But so that was the big move for us. So we report into global operations.
All right, and how were people reacting to that change?
I think it was, well, I think from the procurement team function, I think it was a little bit of a relief, quite honestly, because I don't know that they were able to have the lens on it that they probably wanted to in order for it to be as successful as it can be. It also is one of the 4 pillars of diversity inclusion for our company. So we do have a champion in each of sort of the 4 areas that we focus on for diversity inclusion, be it the associates, the customers, owners, or suppliers. And so we as a strategic leadership team across diversity inclusion also meet. So it helped to elevate that group and have supplier diversity be at the table with these other 3 strategic areas, which has visibility from our board subcommittee on diversity inclusion. So I think overall it was a really good move, and it also made it so that, again, we were able to really start connecting the world of supplier diversity much more deeply across the business as opposed to just through procurement.
Awesome. I think that sounds like a best practice where I think a lot of companies can bring back to understand the different dynamics and how do you connect different multifunctional teams as well. And Nedra, how about for Accenture? Is it structured the same way?
Well, actually, we're still aligned with global procurement. So our supplier inclusion and diversity, as well as our sustainability, all rolls up into our CPO. However, it is included in our CIO goals, it's included in our CEO goals, our CFO. So we make sure that every one of our C-suite has a supplier diversity inclusion goal around that. So it's important with our CFO, right? Because he determines how much money I can get to support all of the great organizations out on a global basis. So I think, being in procurement as well, a lot of ours is driven by our clients. So many of you in here are all of our clients. Yay. So it's really important for us to know what we're procuring. To know that if we're procuring this, is there a diversity component? Is there a key diversity supplier, whether it's a woman-owned business, MBE, Aboriginal, Native American, anything in that organization, we want to make sure that whatever Accenture is procuring globally, that we are including a supplier diversity component around that.
Awesome. And Andy, can you speak a bit about how does P&G incorporate supply diversity as part of sustainability, which I believe that's your role in?
Right. So my role, actually, title has changed recently to supplier citizenship. And so briefly, a few months ago, P&G as a corporation issued a new corporate agenda that we call citizenship. And it's essentially our declaration that we believe it's both a business imperative and also a responsibility to be good corporate citizens by focusing on 5 areas: diversity and inclusion, gender equality, environmental sustainability, ethics, corporate responsibility, and community impact. Those are the 5. And so we recognize that my role really is in interfacing in how do we bring to life those 5 focus areas of citizenship with all of our suppliers. And so if you look at where I play, global supplier diversity being one, it cuts across 4 of those 5 areas. I also have responsibility for responsible sourcing that I know many of you in the room have, and then environmental sustainability with our supply base as well. I think the biggest point that I'd want to make on this is that what the new framework allows us to do is amplify the role that suppliers play in bringing all of those things to life. And we can certainly talk more about that throughout the panel.
Well, it's great that you're a champion for many different initiatives. In each of these functions, is there a person who's leading, let's say, responsible sourcing? More than a champion, is that his day job? And I'm sure someone will lead environmental sustainability, right?
Sure. So if I look at it at a corporate level, we have, for each of those 5 focus areas, someone within the business, usually at the president or officer level, that is sponsoring that particular focus area. I sit on the leadership teams for them in each of those 5 focus areas. So ultimately, it rolls up to me. I do have people on my team. I've got a team of about 4 people globally now, each of whom plays a different role in things. When we look at global supplier diversity, I'm really the one that's on point for that, so to speak. I've got a person on my team in Europe that really leads up our responsible sourcing program. And right now, I'm the main leader for the environmental sustainability side. I've got a person coming into my team in July that's going to take a little bit of that responsibility off of my table.
And I trust that in each of these pillars, there are specific KPIs.
There are, absolutely. And so in supplier diversity, I think everyone is familiar with them, and we could talk a long time about this. Spend is certainly one of them. We also, as some of you know, track things like supplier performance, economic inclusion through job creation, et cetera, and I'm happy to take you through that in more detail. From a responsible sourcing standpoint, as again, I'm sure many of you in the room do, we do a lot of audits. I don't like that being the metric because that's not necessarily what's most important. It's really looking at how do we identify and mitigate potential risks or incidents within our supply chain. From an environmental standpoint, it's really about bringing to life P&G's publicly stated 2020 environmental sustainability goals around renewable energy, greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera.
Okay, great. It looks like, I think, most of our organizations have multiple, pursuits in different areas. How does supplier diversity fit in, part of the corporate mission? Or how I probably want to frame it, how important is supplier diversity amongst the multiple, initiatives, which if you ask someone from sustainability, they will say, that is the most important, right? So maybe Denise.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, diversity inclusion is actually important enough to have a board subcommittee focused on it. So I think that in and of itself shows the focus of the company. Diversity and inclusion in general has been part of our core mission and values from the company's start. Our first value is put people first, and that goes across our entire value chain, whether it be the associates, our customers, our owners, or our suppliers. And so I do believe that it has high value in the company. It is visible at all the highest levels of the company, whether it be the board or the President's Council that our CEO heads with all the presidents across all of our organizations. So, and there's a quarterly scorecard that's visible to our CEO and to our board subcommittee on the 4 areas I mentioned, supplier diversity being one of them. So it has that highest level of visibility. There are goals set against it and progress that is being measured against it. So it's definitely something that's very important to our company.
And Nedra, in Accenture, is there a corporate sponsor or an owner for supplier diversity?
Yes, so there has to be an executive sponsor across all of our operating groups. So we have 5 operating groups, which are like financial services, health and state and local, communication, media, technology, resources, and products. So those are our 5 operating groups, and there must be an executive sponsor in each one, and they each have goals of not only inclusion and diversity, so I work very closely with our inclusion and diversity team, as well as supplier diversity. And Accenture just released, I guess about maybe a month ago, some of our external goals on how we were doing hiring people internally, how we were hiring women, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, how are our women being hired in very senior level positions. So we do that internally, as well as I release our supplier diversity goals. Does your product have, what's your particular client? So Marriott's my client. How are we tracking against it with our supplier diversity? And when you start comparing those to other operating groups, you create this competition, and it becomes a friendly competition. So it's now that each one of those executives in each operating group has a report around how they're doing with supplier diversity.
Oh, that's great. I think it's a good idea to have some friendly competition, right? Okay, Andy, can you speak about P&G's approach when it comes to fostering collaboration between all these different functions? And I think the fact that you are the champion for all this, and which they report to you, I think that's proven to be successful.
Sure. What's interesting about this is, in some ways, and I didn't share this to begin with, but I also do reside in the purchasing organization, so I report to our chief purchasing officer. And in some ways, I would say we've been our own worst enemy, in the sense that because we've been relatively successful, as many of you have, in meeting the traditional spend targets and numbers, particularly in the United States, we haven't necessarily felt a need outside of purchasing that owns our supply diversity program to get other folks involved. We see a massive opportunity, though, and a need to be able to do that. And so I'm going to come back to what I just explained with our new citizenship agenda. What it does is it creates a platform. That's a term that I'm going to use a lot, because both internally and externally, from an internal standpoint, the platform it creates is it allows me to go talk to key leaders about all the work we're doing with our suppliers. So I mentioned I sit on the leadership teams of each of those 5 focus areas, and I'm bringing the perspective of what are we doing in each of the other focus areas within citizenship, but also the role our suppliers might play in diversity inclusion or gender equality or community impact. And those teams may consist of folks from research and development, from communications, from marketing. And so now we're starting to have much more robust conversations around how do we think about this work in a much broader sense. From an external standpoint, it really becomes the same thing, right? I'm not just talking to my prime suppliers and my diverse suppliers. I'm not just talking to consumers and customers about supplier diversity. I'm talking to them about, again, the role our suppliers play in bringing all 5 of those areas to life.
Is this model replicated outside of Cincinnati?
It is. So we're corporately headquartered in Cincinnati. And again, I'll go back to pros and cons of this. By being centrally located, by being centralized in our purchasing organization, I know that every dollar that our company spends, every supplier relationship ultimately flows up to the same person that I report to, our chief purchasing officer. We are spread across the globe, though. And so we are, even though I sit in Cincinnati and that's where the strategy in the organization is based, so to speak, I know different companies call them different things, champions, advocates. We have a supplier citizenship network. So it's 70 people in our global purchases organization, a variety of levels, spend pools, and most importantly, regions that part of their work plan. And so that's one of the requirements I have. Being an advocate is great, but I want it to be on your work plan and align with your leadership is helping to bring this work to life in each of the different regions.
So when you talk about different regions, does each country have their specific goals?
Yeah, each country we're trying to put in place right now is a plan. And when I say each country, we use the term SMO, Sales and Marketing Organization. And so it might be a region like Western Europe, or it might be a country like India and China. So if I just use India as an example, I was just in Mumbai a few weeks ago talking with our supplier citizenship leader that sits in Mumbai. He is building a three-pronged plan that focuses on different aspects of how we want to drive supplier citizenship in the country of India.
Great.
So one of them is going to be about recycling, with some work that our CEO has done with Prime Minister Modi there. One of them is going to be around gender equality and supplier diversity. We're trying to figure out what the third one is going to be that's going to be focused on what their specific business need is.
All right. I think this is a good way of aligning corporate initiatives with all the different countries that us as multinationals operate in. Denise, could you share in terms of what are the challenges that you face, especially in trying to encourage your other different countries to perhaps understand the need to have supplier diversity and to champion it. Have you seen any challenges?
No, no one has challenges. As Elizabeth said, this stuff is easy, right? So we work now with our acquisition with Starwood in 120 countries. So we have data systems that sort of pull information, sometimes centrally, oftentimes decentralized. So I think data, from a first and foremost, is a very big challenge. And until we are at the point where we're using a centralized system to be able to really pull this data through in a significant way, it is very difficult to even begin to understand where we're spending our dollars today, how much of that is and is not diverse, where the opportunities lie. Even having names of suppliers that we're using sometimes becomes a little bit more difficult on an aggregate basis. So I think that's definitely a big challenge. I think we have hotels that operate all over the world, and we have people in those hotels that are obviously passionate about different things. Having the push all the way through into the individual operations of the value of this, given the diversity of cultural connectivity to this, I think it's to be a little bit challenging. So it's not because people don't want to do the right thing or don't feel like there's a business case for supplier diversity. Part of it is some cultural nuances where they don't believe that there is an issue or can't really speak to it, as some areas in Europe that we know of. Others don't even know how to even begin. There aren't the systems in place or the level of visibility to the issue to the point where they can feel the sort of the energy to actually do something about it, because they don't actually realize that. So I think the challenges vary. I think we do have, because of this visibility all the way through the top of the organization, and because of the connectivity through the procurement teams and through the operations leaders in continent to actually report against their goals on a quarterly basis, it is becoming more embedded and therefore has a little bit more sort of stickiness across the globe as we continue to grow it.
Well, the way we talk about the globe, I mean, it sounds like it's a very small place, but it is not. It's made up of multiple countries, different culture, nuances, like you mentioned. Maybe can Nedra, can you talk a bit about, does each of your countries understand the different perspective on supply diversity, and what does it mean to them? Because I'm based in China, and if I talk about supply diversity, sometimes there are some confusion on what does it mean. How do you define that? Is it just women only, and minority, and how do you consider what's minority? So how does Accenture define and share a commonality in terms of this approach?
So one of the things that we do, I'm very fortunate to have a full-time staff of 7 that's dedicated to supplier inclusion and sustainability, with a dotted line to about 40 of what we call our supplier inclusion champions. And they are aligned to our global procurement under sourcing and category management. So having that, we all make sure that I have someone in each one of those countries, and I think Teresa said it earlier, is understanding those country laws, the legislation, and government. So we start there on what's important and making sure that, are we meeting those requirements? And so it's not just checking the box of those requirements. We have those discussions of why that's important. And what we've come out is, I take the time with each one of those country leads, as we call them, and I say, let me tell you about my diverse suppliers in this area. So in South Africa, we're there with, we're having our mentoring program with 11 Black-owned businesses that are all technology companies. They're winning awards, but if they were so small, no one in our country would understand if I just said, here's a diverse supplier. So we actually take that time to educate each one of them of what that definition is, but why it's important, how it adds value, how it can add value to our client, and how it can add value to Accenture. So I think it's about an overall education. And it's interesting, being a company of over 400,000 people, one of my FY17 goals is educating my internal stakeholders about what is supplier diversity, supplier inclusion, and sustainability.
I think you brought up a great point. I spend a lot of my time also trying to address our internal stakeholders. And sometimes when we do events, it is with the aim of trying to create awareness internally that this is top of mind, and we have our leaders, our vice presidents participating in it, and I think that's been quite helpful, right? In P&G, do you see a similar structure as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think with any large company, right, this is a challenge that we all face. Making sure that we have not only the right internal buy-in, but the right awareness is key. It's a very specific example for me. Again, many of you in the room attended the great Walmart Women's Economic Empowerment Summit yesterday. I had a handful of our leaders at P&G with me, and as I've shared with some of you, these are folks that have a passion for our citizenship program and that are aware of our supplier diversity program. They may not be in the details enough to really give me good feedback and to push me and to challenge me in different areas. And that was one of the biggest things that I personally got out of yesterday, is having them be able to push and challenge me in ways that maybe I haven't before. And so what I'd say is, well, my guess is most folks in the room, I know most of you in your programs, you do a pretty good job of making sure the key internal stakeholders that have a say in setting goals, and maybe this is part of their reward structure, we probably don't need to worry about getting them engaged, at least for the folks in this room. We need to think about is, who are some of those other key stakeholders that we need to engage? How do we go about doing that in the right way to be able to amplify the impact this has on the world and be able to create more business value for all of us?
Awesome.
Ronnie, if I could just add a little plug. We are working with WEConnect and developing a training tool for our internal stakeholders in partnership with some of our key leaders to really have an effective tool to actually use in market across the globe to help, whether it be the procurement leaders, operations teams, individuals who are engaged in this, as part of a relaunch of our development of a marketing campaign around our supply diversity program. To really help have the systems in place to help educate those, because we obviously can't be everywhere, but to have something as clean and clear as a video, where Elizabeth speaks to the value of supplier diversity, what this means, what does partnering with WEConnect look like, how do you actually get started, getting those globally visible and having individuals go through that kind of training and learning of this programming, I think is going to really help escalate it, especially that we've stepped into this large acquisition and we now have 1,500 hotels in our portfolio that did not have supplier diversity as a mandate, as part of the way that they operated and as a top-down leadership push. So I think it's going to really help our company completely realign on what does this look like, how do you actually use these tools and resources, and how do you start, which is obviously for us a partnership with WEConnect first and foremost.
Great.
I just want to add in too, one of the things I've been successful in is I take a lot of my executives that have no idea what supplier diversity, and I show them. And I did this last week by bringing them to WeBank Summit and Salute. They had no idea what it was, and when I left there, their feedback was, how do I get involved? I did not understand how important this was. I have daughters. I'm so excited. I mean, they linked that, seeing that visual to different things. And I've already received like 3 emails from very senior partners at Accenture that was like, I really want to get involved. I want to make sure my client is involved. So sometimes we can tell them, we can send emails, but showing them is a totally different perspective on that.
Great. I'm going to open up questions to the floor. I'm sure many of you do have something that you want to ask our speakers.
Hi, Wade Channel. I apologize for my second bite. I got to be on a panel, and now I'm taking the mic. 2 points. First, we're talking about diversity. I want to commend WeConnect for diversity on panels. You know, those of you who have suffered through years of white male panels, this is wonderful. Thank you. 2, you are hitting something I think that's really critical, and this is as much a consider this as a question. I am certain that all of your companies have strong sexual harassment policies in place. Do you require this of those who contract with you? And if you don't, could you? Because imagine the push down, 1,500 hotels that didn't have diversity in there. They probably have harassment, but maybe not. But as you push down the value chain and get this, it has a very positive impact. It also, you know, in an age where suppliers are and retailers are not differentiated in social media when something goes bad, this is a great risk reduction strategy as well. Just a thought.
It's a great point. If I could share a couple thoughts on this, actually. First of all, to answer your question, we do in our contract language, but I would argue that just having something in your contract language and not bringing to life maybe isn't good enough. And so a couple quick stories here. I'll be brief. We had a situation when I first took over my role leading supplier diversity for P&G about 2.5 years ago, where one of our relatively new partners, like WeConnect, is a relatively new partner for us on our journey. The National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce is also a relatively new partner for us. I know many of you are very involved with them as well. They came to me and made me aware of a situation we had in our supply chain where we had a supplier that was discriminating against an LGBT-owned supplier because they were LGBT. And I'm, of course, as being a bit naive coming into my role, I'm thinking this is a misinterpretation, a miscommunication. And then I see email chains. And I'm embarrassed. I'm saying this is some of the most egregious discrimination that I've seen in my entire career. And so we went and we proactively addressed that. And of course, then it gets me thinking, how do we figure out how to identify and address these things in a more proactive way versus just the reactive way? And so one of the things, and I'll come back to the citizenship framework, giving us the ability to go externally and talk to our suppliers in a very different way. We talk a lot the spirit and the intent of supplier diversity and the spirit and the intent of citizenship. And so what we're going to start doing in fiscal year 17-18, which we've never done before, is we're going to continue tracking things like second-tier spend. But we're also going to start asking questions like, how many of your employees are women? How many in the United States are ethnic minorities? Do you have a human rights policy? Yes or no? What process do you have in place to be able to address things like sexual harassment, et cetera? And so we're going through a bunch of the internal interviews right now with key stakeholders to make sure that they're getting their input into what we're going to go ask of our supply base that we haven't done before.
And I would add that with Accenture, of course, it started with a lesson learned. Always, you know, when something happens, then you start looking at your policies. So we do have that. So we must have those. Those answers are sexual harassment down to human trafficking, anything around each one of those. It's also in our contract language, but there's interviews. Those questions, it must be provided in our RFP. Do you have policies around this? What's the training of your employees around that? And to take it a step further, the contractors that do come on and work with Accenture must take all of this training. And it is linked to us, and it is tied. If you're doing well and you didn't take your training, you're going to get dinged for that in your compensation. So it has become very important that it is added into pretty much everything that we do. I don't know how our training team does it, because there's always pop-up reminders of everything, but we do have that included.
Thank you for the question. Anyone else has any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. Hi.
Maybe I'll. Jason Trimieu with Facebook. My question is, do any of you think that you're doing too much? I think obviously the issues that we're trying to solve for are huge. And I feel like both in the position I hold now at Facebook, but also in previous roles, the folks involved in diversity we're the catch-all for every social issue and problem that impacts the world. And I say this with seriousness. I mean, this is, I can point to examples both in my own experience, but I've seen it outside as well, where this just becomes dilutive and you find yourself really struggling, even with the people you have, the resources you may have, or the sponsorship that you may have from your executives, of actually driving impact. An impact that people have been working on these issues for a while, so this is not, of course, new. So I ask that question with real seriousness. Do any of you think you're doing too much?
I think the answer is probably yes. I think you're exactly spot on that we are a catch-all, and we are looked to help solve for things that come towards the company where there is nowhere else for that solution to be kind of brought forth. And so I think you're right in terms of that it could potentially create situations where we're diluting ourselves and the focus areas that we really do want to spend our time and energy on. The thing I always think about before, spending any time or energy on response to something that is potentially outside of my immediate scope and it's not on my MBOs, my, goals for the year or whatever it may be, is will this ultimately benefit the company, or will it create an issue for the company if I don't effectively support the company in responding to whatever that is that's coming our way? And sometimes you just kind of have to do that because there's really, knowing that if you don't step into that role, there isn't necessarily someone else that's going to be able to help provide even, more context for it. So I think you're fully correct in saying that it does potentially put us and the subjects and focus areas that we're already working through at risk. I think it gets even compounded when you have things like sustainability as well as supply diversity, because there's just that creates a little bit broader spectrum of things that you're accountable for. So I don't know what to do about it, but I think it's that putting that lens on it of, if this is something you can ignore, okay, that's something to think about. But if you ignore it, there's potential risk to the company. I think that from a publicly facing company perspective, that's something that I can't comfortably just let go.
I think from a Walmart perspective, definitely, we need to have some resources put behind supporting supply diversity, and which we do, right? In our home office and also in our overseas offices. And what is important is that, for example, an event like yesterday that we organized, which I suppose some of you attended, it's not just us, the team in Women in Common Empowerment that is managing it. We get help as well from many different supporting functions as well. I think what is important, of course, you need to have a core team that manages the mandate, but I think importantly is you need to incorporate the spirit and into the entire organization, right? So you need to talk about the importance of supplier diversity and also sustainability on our daily day-to-day work. And what I'm trying to say is that it needs to be incorporated in the company's culture and DNA. When every time when you talk about meeting a supplier, is it top of mind? Do we ask the question? Are you a diverse supplier? Are you a women-owned? So I suppose of course you do need to have a working team to track, to measure, to run programs, to outreach. So I think that's a challenge which we all have to navigate.
And I would agree. I think one of the things we've done is as Andy was saying, I work very closely with our corporate citizenship team, our environmental team, and once a month we get together and we go over those catch-all. And it's great when you get to this doesn't fall in my area. But it's because you really want to respond correctly. So some of the questions that might land in my lap, you don't want me answering because I'm sure that's going to be wrong. So we get together with those groups because most of the times one of us can answer those. So we basically have a call of questions. So if I get it, I just put it in this mailbox and I'm like, I just got this question. I really think this was working with historically Black colleges, and I was like, this is great, but this doesn't really fall in my area, so I can take it to my supplier inclusion or my recruiting team so that they can understand where that's coming in. So we can't do it all, but it does fall in our lap. It's a good question.
Thanks. Following that, Hella Jorgensen, Global Compact and Be Accountability. So following on that, would you say it's part of your business strategy, not sustainability strategy, but real business strategy? This is something the board of directors will talk about. So when I'm out talking to companies and board of directors, we have something that I've just put down here. We call it procurement with purpose for profit. So it's not a question about saying, oh, we do this because somebody say we have to, but it's actually part of the business strategy, knowing that if we do not do this, we are going to be missing out. We are not built to last. So would you say that it's part of the strategy as such?
I will say for me, I feel very confident sitting here saying that supplier diversity, supplier sustainability are part of our business strategy today, and I feel that's been the case for probably at least 10 years. What I would say is that's actually not where I want to be going forward. I want to shift that from being just a business strategy to it being a competitive advantage. And that's the shift that we're in the process of making now. I would say we're not quite there yet, but that's where we're trying to move.
And I would say it is a competitive advantage for us. That is a big value package. And it's very key for us to make sure that we weren't checking the box. So when my CPO brought me into this role, it's like, I'm not checking a box. Are we going to make sure that we're adding value to our clients, to those organizations? So it is that competitive advantage because it's not in that strategy. It's something we want to do. It's something we're continuing to improve, but it's adding that value stream to all of our clients.
Yeah, and I definitely agree. It's diversity and inclusion is part of the business strategy. It wouldn't have the level of visibility from a board perspective, from a president perspective, if it was not. Everyone, wants to do the right thing, but this is absolutely holistically between the supplier, the customer, the associate, and the owner piece, absolutely strategically something we must focus on, and it does provide us an opportunity with our B2B relationships to absolutely differentiate ourselves from our competitors.
Yeah, and I echo that as well. I think for us, supporting supplier diversity is good business and it's smart business as well. And I'm sure we have so many examples, and we talked that through a lot yesterday as well on why bringing in women-owned businesses, how are they able to understand our customers better and bring products that are of good quality and innovative. So it is smart business. Sorry, it's one here and then another one.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Rona Forte with Walgreens. Hi, Nedra. Hi, Andy. Question for you around brand loyalty, brand ambassadorship. Do you actually hold your suppliers accountable in terms of your utilization of your loyalty programs, if you have them, and how do you do that?
I'll go first. We don't have a loyalty program per se. One of the things, but to your point, right, one of the things we always talk about is the role that our suppliers play in being, to your word, ambassadors, right? Inspiring others' voices on our behalf, consumers of P&G products. I want to make a point around just experimentation, right? A lot of what we have to do here, we have a clear vision, a clear strategy, then you've got to go experiment and just try things and accept that not everything is going to work. And one of the things we experimented with recently is that we have a P&G online store. And so we actually gave access to all the employees of our top 10 diverse suppliers by spend to our P&G online store for a period of time and gave them a coupon code. We work with our e-business team. And the point was, let's just give this a try and see if we're actually going to generate additional revenue. What we found is that the coupon that we gave folks had a redemption rate of 10 times the normal redemption rate that we would see, right? And so that's led the e-business team now to come to me and say, hey, do we need to build a whole separate website for just suppliers and all kinds of things like that, right? And so I don't know if we're going to end up doing that, but at least as a clear indication, it's a clear data point, and it's now that pilot has now ended, and we are now taking that in 5 different directions and trying a few other things to see if we can build off of it.
We don't have the loyalty program, but we do hold our suppliers at a very high level. But one of the things that we've been able to do is once you are a supplier, once you've gone through our mentoring program, you're there forever. And we do help a lot of our suppliers that are in the U.S., we've helped them go global. So doing that, it becomes that certain kind of loyalty that's there without having that formal program that's there. So, and we'll go to other organizations and we say, hey, we have this great supplier, or they say the same. So it just becomes that, I think, holding each other to a very high standard, and then you'll see that loyalty come. But it is in our contract language, though, to make sure that we are upholding our brand and that there's no risk to any of our clients as well.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yeah.
Hi, Pam Alexander with Ingersoll Rand. So the question I have is the diversity, supplier diversity part of sustainability just one piece of it, or are they 2 separate goals? And if they're separate, how do you tie them together?
So I'll take this first. So ours are separate. So we do have a set of sustainability and social responsibility goals. We're actually just finalizing the new set now. And then we do have within our company a diversity inclusion set of goals, supplier diversity being one of those 4 pillars. So there is a specific diversity, supplier diversity goal that we have. When we get a win to have a diverse supplier that has a sustainable product or service, that's awesome. It is rarer, but we always get really excited, especially as we're having matchmakings. If it's a product that can kind of meet those needs, that gets us really excited, and also is an opportunity for us as the sustainability group to be more engaged in the decision because it's closest to our business, and so I think that's always exciting. Charlotte and our team here found a supplier that had a sustainable product, a woman-owned business, and even though it was not something that was out of contract from a timing perspective, she did her due diligence, got it tested in some hotels. The hotels love the product, and now it's growing fast in market, and we're really excited to see where it goes. And we know that one of our prime suppliers who wants to have that product potentially is that that could potentially be an opportunity of growth for that woman-owned business. So.
Yeah, it's separate but overlapping, and so with our sustainability, we do a lot with our suppliers on their renewable energy. What are they doing to the environment? So all of those are included again on our RFPs. So we'll look at that supplier. So what are you doing that's sustainable to the environment? How are you tied to our environmental goals? So we try to do that, but all lap it together when we're looking for those diverse suppliers by trying to find out where their carbon footprint is.
They're separate for us, different metrics. And again, for us, the integrator is the citizenship framework.
Yeah, for Walmart, it all reports under our global responsibility. So it is separate, but we are, reporting into the chief sustainability officer, who also is, the president of Walmart Foundation. So, I think this is a good way to separate it at the same time having its own attention. Right? Okay, any last burning questions before we end? Oh, sorry. I can't see your side.
I'm not going to be as good as the Facebook guy, which was a really good question. Hi, Juan Matrañero with S3. I had the pleasure of working for UBS and Barclays for about 15 years. I set up shared service centers in Singapore and in Lithuania. My question to you all is, how much do you get involved operationally? Because the issue I had is I had some women-owned suppliers in those countries. I had huge issues with hiring managers in the US and the UK hiring women. So usually we would keep that internally for an HR process. You would highlight that immediately, right? The hiring managers are sort of discriminating against women. When we have a supplier involved, a woman-owned supplier, did you guys get involved in those kind of issues? And how did you mitigate those kind of issues?
I guess I'll take a stab at that. I'm not really sure if we had an issue because if we want to use someone, I say use them. No, just kidding. It's basically we work very closely with HR and inclusion and diversity. So if there's a woman-owned business that we want to use, if there's any discrimination against that, that definitely comes in with our HR. So it's all, I guess, captured in that. And what I'm saying is if a diverse supplier was not utilized, then there's a form that they must say why. Why was this diverse supplier not utilized? So if there's any discrimination being, given there, I'd hope that would come out in that point.
Local HR policy.
That's a global.
Okay.
That is a global policy because everything is done with a global form, but of course it's going to each country law. So making sure that we are doing, respecting those legislation laws in that country. But it is a form that we must have on any time that we use any diverse supplier. Why were they not chosen? And we use that as a growth point. But if there's any discrimination coming out of that, then we would take that to HR.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers, Denise, Nedra, and Andy, who shared, their perspectives on how, the company supports supply diversity and how all of that falls into as part of their corporate strategy and also sustainability goals. I think we have learned today that different companies may have somewhat different approaches to this, but one thing's for sure, that a few learnings that I've had is that for supply diversity to be successful, we need to have a clear executive sponsor and owner for this goal, and of course, like our friend from Facebook mentioned, there's a need to have some resources to put behind it, and I think importantly as well, it can be in as part of sustainability or outside or sitting as part of a bigger umbrella. I think overall, supply diversity is gaining in terms of importance, in terms of, it's getting a lot of awareness, especially for me, I can speak about outside of US, it is becoming more and more talked about, and we are measuring and tracking it. So I think it is moving in the right direction. How different companies wants to structure it, I think it really depends on how their organization is being organized. So thank you everyone. Thank you for the questions as well.